The envelope arrived exactly 1 month after my mother's funeral. Plain white, no return address, just my name in crisp black ink, Michael Chen. Inside was a single playing card, the ace of spades, and a phone number. Nothing else. I probably would have thrown it away if I hadn't been so desperate. 4 months behind on rent, credit cards maxed out, and the debt from mom's medical bills crushing me like a weight around my neck. When I called the number, a woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was professional, emotionless. Mr. Chen, we've been expecting your call. Who is this? We represent an organization that offers unique opportunities to those in financial distress. One game, one day, $50 million to the winner. I laughed, but it came out hollow. What's the catch? No catch, just consequences for losing. A pause. Check your email in 1 hour. Tell anyone about this invitation, and you'll be disqualified. The email contained coordinates for an abandoned convention center on the outskirts of the city, along with instructions to arrive at 6 a.m. the next morning. I spent that night staring at my ceiling, thinking about Mom, about how she'd worked herself to death trying to give me a better life, about the experimental treatments that had drained her savings before killing her anyway. I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered to the darkness, but I don't have any other choice. The convention center loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a tombstone. The parking lot held exactly 32 other people, all clutching identical white envelopes, all wearing the same look of desperate hope. A black SUV pulled up silently. The man who stepped out wore an expensive suit and a mask. One of those creepy, smiling theater masks that always seem to be laughing at a joke only they understand. Welcome, players, he said, his voice slightly muffled behind the mask. You're about to participate in a very special competition. The rules are simple. Complete 6 children's games successfully, and you'll leave here a millionaire. Fail, and you'll wish you had never received that envelope. They led us inside through service corridors that seemed to spiral endlessly downward. The air grew colder, staler. Someone behind me was praying under their breath in Spanish. Finally, we emerged into what must have been the main exhibition hall, though it had been transformed into something else entirely. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet high, lost in shadow. The floor was painted with colorful patterns that reminded me of elementary school playgrounds. And at regular intervals around the vast space stood masked figures in red jumpsuits, each holding what looked like modified paintball guns. Your first game, announced Suit, is a classic, red light, green light. Though we've made some modifications to increase the stakes. Move during red light and you're eliminated. You have 5 minutes to reach the finish line. A giant doll stood at the far end of the hall, its head turned away from us. When it began to sing, the sound echoed unnaturally in the massive space. Red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. We surged forward as a group. The doll's head began to turn with a horrible mechanical grinding. Red light! I froze. To my left, someone stumbled slightly. Just a tiny adjustment of their foot. The sound of the gun was surprisingly quiet. The man looked down at his chest in confusion, then collapsed. The red spot spreading across his shirt wasn't paint. The masked figures efficiently dragged his body away, leaving only a dark smear on the concrete. Someone screamed. Several people tried to run for the exit. They didn't make it 3 steps. Green light! I ran. We all ran. The survivors, I mean. Our footsteps echoed in the massive space, punctuated by the dolls singing and the periodic shots that meant another player had failed. Each time I heard that soft poof sound, I expected to feel the impact in my own chest. By the time I crossed the finish line, there were only 11 of us left. I bent over, hands on my knees, and vomited. No one commented. We were all too busy trying to process what we just witnessed, what we just participated in. They led us to a dining area, a sterile white room with a long table. The meal they served was elaborate. Wagyu beef, lobster thermidor, dishes I couldn't even name. I thought of my last meal before coming here. A package of ramen noodles eaten dry because I couldn't afford to pay my gas bill. Looking around the table, I studied my fellow survivors. Elena, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, sat directly across from me. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted her water glass. I had to come, she whispered, more to herself than to me. My daughter, the treatments, insurance won't cover it. To my left was Marcus, a former high school teacher who'd lost everything in a divorce. Next to him sat Sarah, young and pretty but with haunted eyes that had seen too much. Raj sat at the far end, silent and watchful. His reasons for being here held close to his chest. Our sleeping quarters was a dormitory-style room with bunk beds. None of us slept much that night. How could we? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that first man falling. The look of confusion on his face as he realized the games were real. As he realized he was going to die, morning came too soon, announced by harsh fluorescent lights and the sound of locks disengaging. The masked figures led us to what looked like a massive indoor chasm. 2 platforms stood at either end, connected by parallel glass bridges suspended over a dizzying drop. "Hopscotch," Sud announced, emerging from the shadows. "Cross the bridge to reach the other platform. Simple enough." He produced a metal ball bearing and tossed it onto one of the clear glass panels. It shattered instantly, fragments tinkling down into the darkness below. "Some panels are tempered glass, which will support your weight. Others," he gestured at the shattered panel. "You have 10 minutes. Begin." The drop looked to be at least 6 stories. At that height, survival wasn't an option. We stared at the deadly playground before us. No one moved. 9 minutes, 30 seconds. A young man, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. "I worked in my father's glass factory," he said. "Maybe I can—" He never finished the sentence. The panel he stepped on gave way immediately. His scream echoed until it didn't. The sound of impact made several players vomit. 8 minutes left. Elena went next, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had nothing left to lose. She made it across 3 panels before choosing wrong. I'll never forget the look of resignation on her face as the glass unsplintered beneath her feet. 7 minutes. We developed a strategy. Someone would test panels with their weight, establishing a safe path, or marking deadly ones with their lives. It was ruthless mathematics. Better to lose one person finding a wrong panel than everyone trying different routes. The screams never got easier to hear. Each one echoed through the massive space, followed by that terrible moment of silence before my turn came with 3 minutes left. 5 people had died, mapping out a partial safe path. I stepped onto the first verified panel, then the second, third, fourth. The glass creaked under my feet. Every step felt like an eternity. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold air. One wrong choice and I'd join the broken bodies below. 1 minute. I jumped to the final panel, landing hard. It held. Behind me, I heard another panel shatter, another scream cut short. I didn't look back. Only 4 of us made it to dinner that night. The next game took place in a massive maze built from shipping containers stacked 3 high. Rust-stained metal walls stretched into darkness overhead. The rules were simple. Find the key to unlock the exit door. But we weren't alone in the maze. "Our hunters will be joining you," Sud announced as masked figures armed with various weapons filed in. "They're very good at their job. Oh, and we've added some surprises to keep things interesting." They gave us a 5-minute head start. The moment we entered the maze, emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow. The metal walls made every sound echo, making it impossible to tell where noises were coming from. The first trap nearly took my head off. A weighted blade that swung down from above when I triggered a tripwire. I heard someone scream in another part of the maze, followed by the wet sound of steel meeting flesh. We quickly learned to look for signs of traps, suspicious wires, pressure plates on the floor, unnatural gaps in the walls where something deadly might emerge. But checking for traps slowed us down, and the hunters were getting closer. I heard them before I saw them. The deliberate sound of boots on metal, the soft scrape of weapons against walls. They weren't rushing. They were herding us, driving us deeper into the maze where more traps waited. Sarah died when she ran from one of the hunters directly into a trap. Metal spikes that burst from the walls of a narrow corridor. The sound of her death attracted more hunters. Marcus actually managed to fight back when one cornered him. He was a former wrestler, and he managed to disarm the hunter and take their weapon, some kind of modified stun baton. But his victory was short-lived. The sound of fighting drew 3 more hunters. We heard him screaming for a long time after that. I found Raj hiding behind a container, pressing himself against the wall as footsteps approached. We shared a look of understanding. Alone, we were easy prey. Together, we might have a chance. Working together, we managed to avoid 2 more hunters and disable a trap that would have filleted us with razor wire. But our luck couldn't last forever. The hunters found us just as we spotted the exit door. There were 3 of them, armed with those batons and what looked like serrated hunting knives. Raj shoved me toward the door. "Run," he shouted. "I'll hold them." The knife took him in the throat mid-sentence. I ran, his gurgling sounds following me as I sprinted for the exit. I had the key. I'd found it earlier, hidden inside a false panel. My hands shook as I tried to fit it into the lock. Behind me, boots on metal. Getting closer. The key turned. The door opened. I slammed it shut just as something heavy impacted the other side. I was the only survivor from the maze. They let me rest for an hour in a small concrete room. No bed, just a metal chair bolted to the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Raj's face as the knife caught him mid-word. Saw Sarah's body impaled on those spikes. Heard Marcus's final screams echoing through the maze. The door opened. Suit stood there, mask gleaming in the fluorescent light. "Congratulations," he said. "You've made it further than most." But the final game? Well, that's special. The room he led me to was different from the others. Smaller, more intimate. A single table stood in the center, holding a revolver. "Russian roulette," Suit explained. 1 bullet, 6 chambers. Simple enough. And if I refuse, then everything you've survived until now becomes pointless. You die, your debts transfer to your next of kin, and we find someone else desperate enough to play. He picked up the gun, spun the cylinder. Or you can take one chance. One pull of the trigger. Win, and you walk away with $50 million. The gun felt heavy in my hand. Real. This wasn't like the other games. No running, no strategy, just pure chance. 1 in 6 odds of dying. Better odds than I'd had in any other game here. I raised the gun to my temple. The metal was cold against my skin. "Wait," Suit said. "One last choice. You can point that gun at me instead. If you're wrong, my men will kill you instantly. If you're right, well, maybe you get some answers before your money." I looked at him, at that mask that had watched us die one by one. Why? Why do all this? "Entertainment," he said simply. "For people wealthy enough to be bored with normal thrills. Every camera in this facility broadcasts to a very exclusive audience. They bet on the outcomes. The house always wins, of course." He spread his arms. "So what's it going to be? Test your luck or take your revenge?" I thought about Mom then, about how she'd worked herself to death trying to give me a better life, about what she'd think of what I'd done to survive. I turned the gun towards Suit. He laughed. "I was hoping you'd do that." I pulled the trigger. Click. Empty chamber. The pain was instant. A taser hit from behind, sending me convulsing to the floor. As my vision blurred, I saw Suit standing over me, removing his mask. "The gun was never loaded," he said. His face was ordinary, unremarkable. "We had to see if you choose survival or revenge. You chose wrong." Darkness was closing in around the edges of my vision. "Don't worry, Hiwi," he said, his voice growing distant. "We'll make sure your death looks like suicide. Just another person crushed by debt, taking the easy way out. No one will ever know about the games." "Why?" I managed to gasp. "Why tell me all this?" He knelt down beside me. "Because dead men tell no tales, and you were dead the moment you received that envelope." The last thing I saw was him replacing his mask, straightening his suit. "Send in the cleanup crew," he said to someone I couldn't see. "And prepare the next batch of invitations. The audience is already placing bets." I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed.